So my name is Andrew Gilbert, for those of you who don't know, and I'm a senior researcher here at the University of Toronto Ethnography Lab. I'm co-hosting the event with Wes Brunson, the Ethnography Lab coordinator this term. My personal pronouns are he, him, his. And we would ask that anyone speaking or presenting today offer a description of themselves and whatever else is in their screen. And I will start with myself. I'm a light-skinned, middle-aged man with very little hair on top, a little bit more on my face, and it's brown and white, a combination. I have a dark sweater on, a tan scarf, and a big bookshelf in the background. As you may have seen at the top of the screen there, we've also enabled closed captioning for the event. And in response to multiple requests, we're also recording it. You should know that, although it's likely to only be available via a link from our website. And for those of you who don't know about the website, Wes will put a link up in the chat in a minute or two. And if you're not already on our listserv, the Ethnography Lab listserv, and would like to be for notices of upcoming events and sometimes research opportunities, you can message your contact information to Wes in the chat and he will add you to the listserv. Okay, most important, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates and the many land-based extractive relationships that the university relies upon to function. For thousands of years, this has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to diverse communities of Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit scholars, artists, and activists from across Turtle Island. And I am grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, especially as an uninvited guest. A little plug for an upcoming event, because it's so soon, in fact. Next Tuesday, the Ethnography Lab will be hosting an event entitled COVID-19 and Organizational Ethnography. And that's going to be next Tuesday afternoon. And Wes, maybe you can throw a link up to the registration page on our website. Okay, a super brief background on the series. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, this Meet the Labs is part of an occasional series that started a year ago, in which we thought we would take the opportunities presented by being forced to kind of go online and gather together members of various ethnography labs or studios or centers or kitchens or bureaus. There's this lovely kind of proliferation of different terms of critical research spaces to see whether we could learn or what we could learn from one another's experiences, because they're so rich. And so some of you may have joined us last spring where we hosted the Kaleidos Ethnography Center from Quito in Ecuador and the Stadtlabor for Multimodal Anthropology from Berlin. And we're delighted now to have the next iteration of this today. Just a brief thing about the format. Each speaker will, so the first kind of hour or so is dedicated to the first discussion of the first lab, and the second hour to the second lab. Kate and then Elizabeth, they'll each speak for about 40 minutes. And then there'll be some Q&A, and then it'll go over to the next lab. And the Q&A can be done either in the chat. You can pose your questions, type them in, or you can do the little raise your hand function and we'll call on you. Okay, Wes, is there anything I should add before introducing Kate? No, I'm seeing a shaking head there, great. Okay, well, we're super delighted to welcome Kate Hennessy from the Making Culture Lab at Vancouver. She's an associate professor specializing in media at Simon Fraser University's School of Interactive Arts and Technology, and an anthropologist with a PhD from the University of British Columbia. As an anthropologist of media and the director of the Making Culture Lab, her research explores the impacts of new memory infrastructures and cultural practices of media, museums, and archives in the context of technoscience. She is a founding member of the award-winning Ethnographic Terminalia Collective, which has curated exhibitions and projects at the intersection of anthropology and contemporary art since 2009. Her work has been published in journals such as American Anthropologist, American Indian Quarterly, Museum Anthropology Review, and Visual Anthropology Review. And in fact, I got to know Kate when I interviewed her and a collaborator, Trudy Lynn Smith, for a podcast I put together for the Raising Our Voices series in the fall of last year. That podcast was an inquiry into what we mean when we use the phrase an anthropology of something. And Kate and Trudy had just published an excellent article in Visual Anthropology Review entitled Anarchival Materiality in Film Archives Toward an Anthropology of the Multimodal. And we had an excellent conversation then, and that is one of the reasons I'm excited to learn more about the Making Culture Lab. So without any further ado, Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, I'm unmuted, a good start. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just really thrilled to be here, especially with Elizabeth, who I adore, and it's great to see you today, Elizabeth. And thanks everyone for coming. Why don't I start by sharing my screen? There we go. Okay, can we see that all right? Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really a great opportunity, and actually a rare opportunity, just to kind of stop and reflect on the work that we're doing at CIAT, we call it, the School of Interactive Arts and Technology, in our group. So this was a chance for me to kind of go back and look through really a lot of photographs, which I'm going to share with you today as a way of thinking through the work of the lab and some of the commitments that we make. But I do just want to start by describing myself, and thank you for the prompt, Andrew. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm an uninvited guest on the unceded territories. Here at Simon Fraser University, we live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And Simon Fraser University spans different parts of this region. So at Simon Fraser University, Surrey, we are on the unceded traditional territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, Coquitlam, Kwai-Kwat, Musqueam, Tsawwassen, and numerous Stolo nations. I'm a woman of, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a settler of Irish and German descent, and I grew up on Penelakut territory on Galiano Island in British Columbia after my parents emigrated there from the United States, from Washington, DC, back in the early 1970s. Today I'm in my office. I have blonde hair. I'm wearing glasses. Behind me is a plant that I'm proud of because I'm not very good with plants, but I managed to bring it back to life. And there's a big white cupboard behind me that's full of various old cords and equipment and things like that. So thank you. So here I am. Okay, so the Making Culture Lab, you know, where to begin? I completed my PhD in 2010 at UBC, and I was very fortunate to be hired at Simon Fraser University at the School of Interactive Arts and Technology, which is in Surrey, which is just outside of Vancouver. So, you know, when I step back and think, you know, what is a lab? It's a series of rooms in a building that is, you know, used and worked in and, you know, inhabit essentially by myself, as well as Dr. Gabriela Aceves Sepulveda, who runs the Critical Media Arts Studio, and the graduate students and often undergraduates and faculty associates and collaborators that we work with. So, you know, the work that each of us is doing and the work that we're doing with our students and the work that graduate students are doing in their doctoral or master's work, this is the work of the lab. As I looked back at various projects that we've undertaken since starting around 2010, there are really quite a lot of them. Some of them are smaller, some of them are longer term, some of them are exhibitions, some of them are multi-year, even, you know, pushing a decade-long projects, and I can't really touch on them all today. And I also realized in looking back at these projects that in a talk like this about the lab, there's just no way to fully acknowledge the range of collaborators that we've been fortunate to work with, as well as really for me, the sort of mentorship and the guidance and the learning that I have been privileged to experience through the range of different projects with different institutions and with the students who have worked with me since I started my work there. So I think what I hope to do is just touch down on a few dynamics of the lab, and I'm going to do that through talking about some of the projects that have kind of formed and led us to some of the work that we're doing today. When I was looking back at the work that we've done and taking this opportunity to kind of look back through thousands of photographs of some of the projects, there just are a few kind of themes that I would say extend through from the beginning of our work together to the project that I'll go into more detail with at the end of the talk, that we're currently working on with artist Jad Kujus, Megan O'Brien. And those themes are, first of all, new forms. So new ways of representing what we thought of as research and what we continue to think of as research, or ways of representing knowledge and creating knowledge. Also really important for the projects we do, collaborative production. So methods, approaches, epistemological commitments, ideas around co-creation and co-authorship, consent and ethics. These are things that are very important in the projects that we do. And then research creation and exhibition. So using research creation, art production, alternative ways of representing, generating knowledge and sharing it for a range of audiences. These are all important for the kinds of projects that we've been doing. And I think this is starting perhaps after 11 years or so to kind of define the kind of work that we do and where we are oriented to in our work. I think there's a few people here from the lab today. So hi everybody. I just wanted to say, like, the lab really is the people who are in it. So, when I look, just trying to give you an overview, essentially, within our lab, we have MA and PhD students that I usually communicate with before the admissions process and continue to talk to throughout. We also have postdoctoral fellows and a number of faculty associates who we regularly collaborate with. We have a number of community partners, usually like museums, galleries, other institutions, and we've worked a lot with a number of Indigenous communities like the Doig River First Nation. We've worked with the Inuvialuit Cultural Resource Center, Scowlitz First Nation, and partnered with the Museum of Anthropology and the Musqueam Indian Band for a number of projects as well. Something that is also really important, which is what makes a group like this possible, is funding. And the students who come into the program are often awarded various graduate entrance scholarships, and then we work together to apply for Vanier and SSHRC scholarships, which is the main funding here in Canada. I apply for grants like Insight grants from SSHRC and other funding to support people through RA work. There are TA positions, and then we apply for a number of production type grants, like through the Virtual Museum of Canada, Canada Council, and other programs like MyTax. So that's very important. And then in terms of infrastructure, we're really we've got some rooms, we have a studio, we have a little gathering space, and through a CFI, Canada Foundation for Innovation, I was able to get a bunch of equipment. So we have cameras and scanners and various tools that we use to do our work. Usually at this point I say, jump in, ask me any questions, but I'll just keep going. And I hope if you have questions, you'll hold on to them. I just wanted to do a very, quick sort of pass through around projects that are going on right now that graduate students are currently taking up in their work. And maybe just by seeing these, you start to get a sense of the kind of work that we're doing. So I know Tanya's here. She's a PhD student. She's interested in, she's doing, I'll just read the title, multimodal research into the contemporary processes of the creation of Eastern Orthodox icons by nuns in a Bulgarian convent. Okay, I think Rachel's also here. So her project, actually, because the Zoom people are covering up part of it, Rachel, I'm sorry, but basically her research has to do with how speculative drawing has helped her to understand around issues around preservation of archives for artists obsolescing time-based media artworks, and she's working with Carolee Schneeman, Laurie Spiegel, and Diane Blau in New York City. Brian Miles is working on a dissertation on Bill Reed's replica canoes. Reese Muntean is studying virtual reality and its intersections with sustainability, culture, and so on. Tyler Campbell is working on a project called Fugitive Geographies Beyond the Archive, Multimodal Engagements with Historic Black Communities and Settlements in Chapel Hill and Vancouver. Brett Gaylor is a master's student. He's working on a project related to his interactive documentary called Discriminator about facial recognition technology. Meta Vaughn is making a remote documentary film about positive representations of people living with cystic fibrosis. And so on it goes. You know, we're really fortunate to collaborate with a lot of faculty members within our school and beyond, including Steve DePaula, who is working with many of us on work that has engagements with artificial intelligence and other forms of research creation using new tools. And with the postdoctoral fellow Jessica Hallenbeck and Satu Dene storyteller Rosemary Georgeson, just this past weekend, we're gathering for a project called We Have Stories, which is exploring the use of collaboratively produced documentary as a method for decolonial curation for an exhibition based here on Galiano Island and surrounding region. So we have a lot of projects ongoing, but I think something that unites them is these sort of notions of working through new forms and new modes of representation, collaborative practice, and exploring that very intentionally. And then research creation as an outcome. So thinking about how we can bring these modes of alternative modes of production and representation into the academy. And very central to that is the work of graduate students who in their theses are being very experimental and trying to sort of work in new ways to bring that work forward with all of the sort of challenges to power, hierarchy, and sort of academic structures that have limited that kind of work in the past. I really also in going back and thinking about this work, I of course, spent a lot of time looking and thinking about the amazing collaboration and the time spent with my friends from the Ethnographic Terminalia Collective. So this is like my little scrapbook of things I just started pulling together, but I just want to acknowledge Trudy Lynn Smith, Fiona McDonald, Stephanie Takaragawa, Craig Campbell, who are the members of the Ethnographic Terminalia Collective that we recently have sort of ended, I suppose, or are rethinking next steps for this kind of work for us as a group or individually. But basically, starting back in 2009, when we were all grad students, we decided that we wanted to try to do something a little bit different and weren't necessarily finding within the framework of the AAA opportunities to showcase work that was not, fitting within that 15-minute presentation format. So we began by finding spaces outside of the conference and bringing together people who were also working in these experimental modes. So if people don't know, Ethnographic Terminalia really became this yearly exhibition project where we would find offsite spaces and basically curate exhibitions around themes that really I think helped us, and I hope also encouraged others to think about these permeable, unstable, and shifting boundaries around the disciplinary structures that I think we felt a bit constrained by, and increasingly acknowledged had to change, and I think have helped us also move in a direction that many of us are thinking about now when we talk about multimodal anthropology, or the relationships between anthropology and art that many of us are now exploring. So we had lots of different exhibitions, but I think one of the ones that I thought might be interesting to talk about just for a second was this exhibition from 2011, which was at the Eastern Bloc Center for New Media and Interdisciplinary Art in Montreal, which was called Field Studio Lab. And this was actually the first one. This was our third exhibition, and the first that we decided to really curate around a particular theme. I think the first two had a kind of collage-like approach where we wanted to reach out and see what kind of work people were doing. We brought those works together, but in the third year, we decided to begin with a sort of like an anchor artist who was Humberto Velez, who's a Panamanian artist who had recently done an incredible work based at the Tate Modern in London, where he invited boxing clubs, youth boxing clubs from different parts of London to work with him over time, and then come and stage a series of fights within the Turbine Hall of the Tate Modern, which he then video recorded, and this became his piece called The Fight. So we exhibited The Fight, and based on some of the themes that emerged from Humberto's work, and also his exhibition that was happening at York University with the curator Emily Changur and the Mississauga and Credit First Nation, we came up with this theme of Field Studio Lab. And the curatorial description is here, but we essentially wanted to step back and think about how these sort of discursive frames were intersecting in anthropology at this time, especially as Craig had recently started his intermediate ethnography lab at UT Austin. I was trying to understand what a lab could be for me in Vancouver, and with our backgrounds in anthropology, how we could think about field, studio, and lab as these sort of mutually constitutive and increasingly
Cazzo, Camillo.
spaces. Hello? Okay. So this was, I think, an exciting moment for all of us, and it gave us a way to think about what these studios could be and labs, and also to increasingly see the incredible work that was happening between art and anthropology by anthropologists, by artists, and how they could speak to each other and sort of open up our sense of what we could do. In 2013, we had an exhibition called Exhibition as Residency, Art, Anthropology, and Collaboration, which was at the Arts Incubator in Washington Park. And this similarly gave us an opportunity to think about what it would mean to bring groups of artists, anthropologists together for a week to produce works. In 2014, at Hierarchy Gallery in Washington, our project, the Bureau of Memories, Archives, and Ephemera, which was created with guest curator Thomas Miller, was yet another kind of exciting way to think through the archives and their excesses and the ephemera that are often not a part of what anthropological research can be. We've also, tried to think about alternative forms of representation of knowledge and how it's generated. So for example, this was a workshop that we held for ISEA, which is the International Symposium on Electronic Arts, where alongside an exhibition by the artist Geronimo Inutik at the Grunt Gallery, where we brought people together to talk about archives, ephemera, and electronic art, and created a little zine, or a very rapid publication that aimed to capture the ephemera of the discussions as opposed to more conventional proceedings. So we became interested in thinking about how publications could try to focus on other types of knowledge outside of conventional publishing and academic sort of acknowledgement of value. We also tried to have a lot of fun as well. I think it was very important, having fun. We also ended up coming back to the AAA to experiment with, again, this sort of rapid publication process through a workshop around photo essays. And, to bring the ET section here to a close and to connect back to Elizabeth and her work, we were really excited back in Vancouver here in 2019 to hold really our last group exhibition called Terminus, which included Elizabeth's collaboration with Danya Glabo and Wakanda University. This, I think, for us, marked the end of a really productive decade of work together, but it, I wanted to talk about it today because it really did set the stage for my own thinking about my practice, about my collaborations with graduate students, and the kind of work that might be possible within the academy. Because I think for me, working outside of anthropology, being in the School of Interactive Arts and Technology, where tenure evaluation, for example, is very focused on acknowledging and encouraging collaboration, encouraging co-authorship, encouraging and recognizing alternative forms, for example, like computer code or exhibitions or research creation artifacts, design artifacts. This has been very important for me in feeling confident that I can bring people with me and try to build a culture around experimentation. That's just a little shot from Wakanda University. And I guess all of this work together within ethnographic terminalia and thinking about the sort of movement around multimodal anthropology and what this was becoming in anthropology led up to this article that I was very excited to co-author with Stephanie and Trudy, as well as Patricia Alvarez and Jenny Cho, Coleman Nye, Shalini Shankar, called Bad Habitus, Anthropology in the Age of the Multimodal. This was a kind of, a response, something that we'd all been thinking about, which was calling on anthropologists and artists and people working within this multimodal frame, especially with new technologies, to really step back and think about our practice and to begin to assert that as sort of an anthropology of our practices of using new technology in the production, in research creation, in art and design was something that we needed to talk about. So I'd say this also has kind of set a tone within our lab, and these are a lot of the, this is kind of a direction that a lot of the work that we're doing is going in. If it, materially, epistemologically, thinking about power and power relations and structures of oppression as they are mediated through technologies and perpetuated by the extractive nature of these technologies. This is the kind of work that I think many of us are interested in and are pursuing right now in our group. So in parallel to that work with ethnographic terminalia, we've also been working on a number of projects that are collaborative and that are conducted in partnership with a number of institutions, including and centrally First Nations communities in British Columbia. So one of the ones that I wanted to show you was launched back in 2017. It's digitalscowlets.ca is the web address. This is a project that was funded by the Virtual Museum of Canada, and it was essentially, it's a very long story, so it's very hard for me actually to do justice to this project in a short amount of time. But essentially it's a community biography that tells the story of the development of collaborative community-based archaeology at Skalitz, and the way that community members over the last 20 plus years have been working with archaeologists at UBC and SFU to define their approach to archaeology. And so the website itself was an opportunity to reflect on that process, and involves a number of short documentary films that we produced with graduate students and community members that tells the story of Skalitz places, and also defines a Skalitz approach to representing their belongings, which may formerly have been called artifacts, but now people are framing as belongings, still connected to the ancestors who created them. And a big part of this work, based on the long-term relationships that the archaeologists and my very good friend and collaborator, Natasha Lyons, have created over time, is building those collaborative relationships, reflecting on them, and working to continue them and develop them. And a big part of that is reconciling where belongings ended up after excavation, and how to bring them back together again. Certainly a big part of that too, within the context of visual anthropology, has been looking at images and thinking about consent, how digital media can be circulated, and what that can look like in a community-based collaborative design process. Also importantly for us, and this is something that many of us in the lab all contributed to, was the translation of that virtual exhibit into a number of physical museum exhibitions that sort of extracted and curated elements of that media into a public space. So this was an exhibition at the Reach Gallery Museum that showcased use of traditional knowledge labels for the media, photo, video, and so on. Later at another museum and archives in Chilliwack on unceded Stolo territory. So this has been an important part of this process, as well as collaboratively authored writing around the project. This has been, I think it's a good example of where our learning has come to through these projects, and the kind of commitments that we aim to reinforce and continue through our work, especially around co-authored writing. And I think it's worth noting that in anthropology, co-authorship has not always been encouraged. It's something that always distressed me. So it's been really wonderful to work somewhere where collaborative writing is acknowledged, especially in the context of community-oriented collaboration. So along the lines of exhibition and research creation as well, I think something I wanted just to point to that's been exciting for us in the lab in the last little while has been our work in collaboration with Trudy Lynn Smith. So Trudy is my very, very dear friend, and also an amazing artist and anthropologist who, she and I, way back actually in 2013 when we were in Chicago, through some of our little meanderings at the Chicago Field Museum archive, sort of came into this notion of an archival materiality, the way that materials change and shift within archives, and how that is a kind of way into thinking about archives, and also the products of ethnographic and anthropological research, what happens to them, and some of their politics. So we've been working to create artworks that help us explore this idea, most recently at the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, where we also been experimenting with film that has turned hot pink in the archive because of color loss. And that's the article that Andrew, you were mentioning, which I think also really for us sets a kind of direction around our work, and proposing this notion of an anthropology of the multimodal, one that takes into account the bad habitus that we've talked about in the past, asking people to think about the products of ethnographic research as situated within those disciplinary and unequal power inheritances, acknowledging that all things do deteriorate and that has to be considered, and then thinking about research creation as a method for an anthropology of the multimodal. How am I doing? I've got 5 more minutes or so, Andrew, do you think?
Sounds good.
Good. Okay, cool. So all of that kind of comes to the project that we're really working on right now, I would say most intensively, outside of the various thesis projects and ongoing work that the amazing students that I work with are moving forward with our committee members. And that is a project with the artist Jad Kujus, Megan O'Brien. Megan is a Haida Kwakwaka'wakw artist and weaver. We first met Megan back in 2018 when her incredible woven artwork called Sky Blanket was part of an exhibition called Border X, which first started at the Winnipeg Art Gallery and was going to be circulating and traveling across Canada over the next couple of years. So Megan was trying to figure out what to do because she realized she didn't want her blanket, which she had woven over several years, to be in art circulation for years to come, traveling around, getting packed up. She wanted to remove it from the exhibition. So she reached out to me and Hannah Turner, who was a postdoc at the time with us, to see if there would be a way to actually 3D print it. It was actually an idea that Jamie Isaac, who was the curator, had late at night. Why don't you 3D print the blanket, and then you can put the 3D print in the exhibition and bring the blanket home. So Megan reached out to us, and we spent a lot of time thinking about what to do, how we could find a way to replicate the blanket in some productive way. What we ultimately came to, along with Conrad Sly, who's a digital modeling artist extraordinaire, we decided to use photogrammetry. We also tried 3D scanning to replicate the blanket. And then we ended up sort of creating, well, just to step back a little bit, as we were going through this process of creating a digital model, we were really struck by the way that the blanket came to be represented through different stages of creating a digital model. And I think most significantly what this did is it opened up this space of reflection and conversation with Megan and Hannah and Conrad and me, as well as Reese Muntean, who's a PhD student and an amazing photographer in our group, to think about the connections between the blanket materially, its origin story, where the wool came from that was spun to be a part of the installation, the mountain goat, how it was hunted, the impacts of logging and other development in the territory where the mountain goat came from, and then Megan's own philosophy and way of thinking about her ancestors and relationships between past, present, and future, and so on. It's like something that a conversation that we recorded for this year's AAA as a podcast with Hannah, Megan, and the artist Andy Everson, who is a brilliant Kwakwaka'wakw artist who helped Megan with the digital design, which she eventually wove into Sky Blanket. So this conversation and this collaboration basically helped us come to the sort of decision to create a digital projection that is essentially an animation between different states of the digital modeling process. And this digital projection was then used instead of the blanket. So in the gallery now, people can see this sort of cycle, and from the sort of little stars of the Pleiades constellation, which sort of manifests into these point clouds and then these polygons, and the kind of the visualization of this digital modeling process through to a kind of fully realized render of the blanket, and then it fades back into the Pleiades eventually again. It was very exciting for us because this happened quite organically through conversation. But ultimately what it meant is that Sky Blanket could be brought home by Megan. And one of the reasons that she wanted to bring it home was that she wanted to use it in a ceremony. And there were a number of important community events and ceremonies that she wanted to use the blanket in, including the naming ceremony for her niece. So, you know, this was really inspiring for all of us. And we decided that we wanted to try to think about other work that we could do together in the future. And so we have been doing that. So writing together about Sky Blanket and the digital work called Wrapped in the Cloud, and thinking about other ways to continue to support Megan in her digital art practice, but also think about what that means for our understanding of the digital, about research creation, cultures of making, and collaborative work overall. And that work has gone into a lot of interesting places since then. This was a really beautiful exhibition called Sovereign Intimacies at the Plugin Institute of Contemporary Art in Winnipeg. And later we were very excited to produce some digital works for Indigenous Fashion Week in Toronto for an exhibition curated by Lisa Myers and Sage Paul called A Thread That Never Breaks. It was hosted in the Abtech Island Gallery by Scawanati and her crew in Second Life. So all of that has been really thrilling for me, very exciting, and I'm really honored to work with Megan and Hannah and Reese and Conrad and all of the students and collaborators who I wish could be here today, but was not to be, who have made all these projects possible. And they've really, I think, cumulatively informed what we can do now. And we continue to try to think about what that means for what we could and should be doing in the future. So I will stop talking now, and thank you very much.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Kate, for that rich overview of actually an amazing body of work now for over so many years. So now's the time for kind of questions from the audience here. Again, you can do the little raise your hand button, which you'll find under the reactions icon at the bottom. If you want to turn on your microphone and/or camera and pose your question, we'll call on you. You can pose a question in the chat, and I think Kate can see that as well. And maybe I'll read it out if one of those comes in. I'll take maybe there's a moment here where I can pose a question and we can let others people gather their thoughts. So one of the things that I was really fascinated by, Kate, is the degree to which the work, I suppose that in the lab then, connects to work elsewhere. Right, so all those ethnographic terminalia exhibitions, let alone the ones that you just spoke to at different gallery spaces in Fashion Week, et cetera. And I'm wondering if you have anything, any reflections on what the value is between, because I think so many of the other, labs or centers often are very place-based, and they happen often within a very contained space with maybe a little bit of connection to community. But not the kind of circulation that you are talking about. So I'm wondering, is there any, what's the value added, or the ways in which circulating out of Vancouver, out of the lab space and then back into it? Are there any stories that emerge or observations or insights that come from that? Because it's quite a unique thing to me, I think, that you have there. Yeah,
great question. I mean, I'm just thinking, and there's I think some of our students are here. I can't see everybody, but there have always been a lot of projects happening in parallel, right? So ethnographic terminalia, we were like students, and then we, got jobs, and suddenly were able to work with students and had a bit more institutional support. So that kind of changed ethnographic terminalia a bit. But we were always fortunate to be able to include students as our team members, right? As research assistants to come with us, to help install, to help document. And similarly, the Scowlitz project that I showed you, you know, it was a multi-year project, and the list of people is literally like 2 meters tall of people who participated when we print out the, you know, acknowledgements list in the exhibition. So, you know, there's always been that sort of, it's actually a tension, I think, something I haven't resolved around anthropology, because my experience as a graduate student is I have a project, my advisor is supporting me, but I'm pretty much working on it on my own. Or conversely, you're working on a project related to something your supervisor is doing, like maybe a particular community. And I feel like that's kind of a pre-existing model of what anthropology could be. So when I went to the School of Interactive Arts and Technology, suddenly there is actually, this is a institution which has a very strong lab culture. Faculty members all have labs. There's a research group culture, and often, you know, let's say someone doing very exciting, you know, AI, VR, you know, studio research, they have big grants, and they're basically inviting students in fully funded, and they're working on specific projects. It's really like that more science lab model. So for me, it was like, oh, I don't know how this is going to work in anthropology, because I need, on the one hand, to be able to support students and, so, you know, admit students who are working somehow in a way that I can support them, but I can't in any way be, I'm not an expert in their field, right? The only thing I'm starting to get to know better maybe is how to work out a methodological approach, an ethical approach, a sort of epistemological framework in which to explore the space that they're working in. And it's started to kind of, it's gotten a bit easier as we've figured out a bit more who we are. So I think all that is to say there's a lot coming. The lab is just a room, and you know, with some gear in it, and it's a place to meet, and then COVID. Blah. So it's just, I don't know if that answers your questions, but it's just that there are always projects happening, and we have to find ways to support graduate students through funding as RAs to work on these projects, at the same time supporting them through the process of developing their projects that build on the experience of people that came before them in the lab and help frame the way these projects can be carried out.
Thank you very much. No, that's great. So we do have 2 questions. And so maybe if it's okay, Kate, what I'd do is I'd ask you to read the one in the chat. Mm-hmm. And then I'll ask William to pose his, and then maybe you can kind of choose which of the elements there to respond to, so we make best use of our time.
Before I answer, okay. All right, so yeah. Diego's question. Can you expand a bit on the everyday work of the lab? How many people are taking part in a specific time? Is the weekly schedule? Is this changing according to specific projects or needs? Good question.
Hold on 1 second. Let's get Williams as well. Is that okay?
Oops.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's okay. Go ahead, William.
Yeah. Thank you. I guess this question is maybe like about labs in general, but it was kind of very curious to me. I mean, I'm kind of very curious about how the adoption of a kind of lab format in a way, like works to, it seems like there's a very strong kind of desire or intention to maintain a certain kind of like reflexivity in practice that the lab somehow mediates in different ways. So, I mean, that was one kind of question, just if you might have something to say about that, but especially this kind of, you know, the way the lab allows you to mediate that kind of commitment, perhaps by the way it allows you to address materiality as materials as a medium or something. That was kind of while you were talking, something I thought.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think so those 2 questions probably sit pretty well together. We aim to have right now bi-weekly meetings. Our meetings are happening right now over Zoom. So pre-COVID, I think also every 2 weeks or so, we have a full lab meeting where everyone comes together, and it's kind of a, talk about what you're working on. People are at different stages in the program. Some are in coursework, some are coming to the end, some are postdocs. It's a chance to meet, to talk, to resolve problems, to ask questions, to think about things like ethics. We often invite people to give presentations, so like rehearsing talks, practicing thesis defenses. It's also a chance for Gabriella and I should just say, Gabriella was hired a few years after me, and we decided to like join forces and share the space, share resources. We often co-supervise or are on one another's students' committees. And it creates, for me, a really invaluable support in working with students and thinking about things and kind of bringing people together. So that's been really important. So her group and my group, we all come together in lab meetings together, and it's a chance for us to share projects that we're working on, to solicit help from people who might want to take up research assistant positions. Students themselves can find collaborators among other students, because often you will see in our publications that people's work is co-authored. And also within our school, it's common to do a cumulative thesis. So that would be at the master's level, two publications, with an introduction and a conclusion. They can be like 2 conference proceedings or maybe 1 major journal article. At the PhD level, it can be between, I think, 3 and 6 published works that then have an introduction and a conclusion that talks about the scope of that work and its contribution as a whole. But each of those pieces can be co-authored. The student should be the lead author on them, but there can be a number of collaborators, which can be students from the lab and also committee members and faculty members. So there's a real those lab meetings are places to talk about how we can work together. And yeah, we have meetings, ad hoc meetings all the time around specific projects that are not the full lab meeting. It's a place for people to sit, eat lunch, hang out, do all kinds of things, I guess. And but of course now is super weird, and everyone's exhausted and tired and worried and dealing with all kinds of health issues and things like that. And it's been a slow return. So it's a lot of Zoom right now.
And what about William's question about the lab form and the kind of reflexivities that it kind of enables?
Yeah, I mean, I think sharing work within the space is one way to be reflexive. Certainly, through at the PhD level, our comprehensive exam process is also challenging because there's no canon. There's no core set of readings that are obvious to anyone. So that's one thing that we've had to also do in the lab, is to come up with a sort of set of possibilities for breadth and depth and methods areas. And I think as students have finished their theses and are developing these lists, we're also starting to define a kind of approach with that for doing the kind of work that we do. So, if that's like, we have a lot of lists that have to do with like new technologies and cultural heritage. We have lists that have to do with research methods, decolonial, feminist, anti-racist research methods. So research creation. So we start to define these ways of thinking, and I guess that's a cultural thing that emerges over time. And I think it's maybe this is almost the first moment where I can even say we've sort of gotten there, because it's really been something that's just developing over time. It has to do with the people who are in the lab.
Awesome. So we probably have time for maybe one more or 2 short questions, if there are any out there. somebody doesn't pose one, then I'm going to have to again, because I don't, I think it's such a, so maybe while we wait for one more minute, what's so interesting to me, Kate, is how the things that you're mentioning, it almost seems like the lab is an extension of the program, whereas a lot of the things that you're mentioning about collaboration, co-authorship, looking to find other people, the kind of, I imagine also a different pace of research practice, a little bit maybe slower, or maybe that's not the right way to put it, but a different kind of temporality once you involve multiple people and different demands. And it's so interesting that that seems to be part of like an extension of the program, whereas in anthropology, anthropologists, I have the feeling, look to labs to be able to do the things they can't do in the programs, or that the programs don't quite accommodate. And so it's just fascinating to hear that, in fact, this is more an extension of a program and maybe an enriching of one, or the program makes space for this. Whereas elsewhere, it's like the lab is the place to make space for that. And so that's fascinating to me. That's just a reflection. And so we have two, maybe one last little question in the chat there, if you see that, and then Monica Patterson has a hand raised, and so maybe we'll take those two as our final two questions. So do you want to read the chat question, and then we'll ask Monica to unmute herself?
Sure. Hi, Monica. Yeah, Making Culture Lab. Well, when I started the job, there was a kind of encouragement to create a space that would help me to bring graduate students together. And I was really interested in that time from a kind of critical perspective on cultures of making, and the way people talked about making and production. And I think one of the reasons I was hired at that school was that with my background in anthropology, I was very interested and did my work through collaborative media production and, virtual exhibit production and so on. So I also could see how important material culture and the digital sort of creative work that I'd been involved in was for creating culture, preserving culture, representing continuity of culture. So that's kind of how I came to Making Culture Lab. And here we still are. And I think I probably would think about it quite differently now than I would have at that time. So it goes.
Go ahead, Monica. Do you want to unmute yourself? Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much for this presentation, Kate. It's really lovely to experience this retrospective of all of your important work, which I've had my eye on for quite some time now. So
hi,
thanks.
And you were part of Field Studio Lab back in Montreal.
That's right. So my question is, I'm one of a group of several colleagues at Carleton who are trying to start thinking about some kind of an ethnography lab. And of course, in the current moment with the pandemic, everything just seems to be stalled and everyone seems to be so exhausted. So you really highlight to me the importance of space. And that's one of the things we're trying to get for ourselves. That's very challenging. But I was wondering if you had any advice that might also take into account the pandemic exhaustion level about how we might start to put things in place to build community, because we don't have the benefit of being located in a really strong single program. I think that can also be a strength. We're trying to draw people from across campus, but even pre-pandemic, we weren't seeing each other a lot. So we're trying to figure out, how do we take some action and form some cohesion and sense of community, perhaps virtually now, in anticipation of having the things that are material that we really want and that we think could best facilitate our connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I can see like Rachel and Meta, and I think Tanya is still here as well. Zoom has been really important for us in connecting over these last 2 years, and we have used it quite a lot. I think a lot of our work together over the last 2 years in those lab meetings is literally just been, how are you? How are you doing? How are you doing? What's going on? How are you feeling? I mean, that has been probably the most important sort of like thing that's sort of held us together as a group is just being there together, even though we're not physically there together. And I think, the space is important, but to me, the space is not the most important thing. I think now the space facilitates people coming together. And certainly I think within some anthropology departments, grad students are often like floating around with no real space of their own or with others. So it does create a kind of collective identity. And that's something that the institution that I'm at supports. Here's your space, Kate and Gabriella, here's your space, other people. And each lab kind of has their own identity, cultural identity that we are encouraged to form. And then the challenge is to remain like critical about that form and try to push it and I don't think of us as a lab, even though we're called that actually, making culture lab. I don't know, I think we're more of a studio, to be honest, like a collaborative production studio. But there is something about the collectiveness, the collaboration, and the kind of experimentation, I suppose, that is really great. So, I love playing music over Zoom with people. I like sharing things. I like talking to people. There's something really important, I think, that can be done now in terms of bringing people together and start to talk about the things that connect us. So I think for sure there's a lot we can read together. There are a lot of methods. There are ethical questions that we can try to untangle and figure out. And that's a good start. And maybe, I don't know, maybe naming it or talking about how to name it with a group of people is an interesting exercise. That's a good question. I don't know. Does that help, Monica?
Yes, very, very helpful and concrete and inspirational.
Playlists. I think people should make playlists together and then listen to them together.
Thank you, Kate.
All right. On that note, I would just like to one more time thank Kate for being here and for sharing with us. I mean, such a remarkable 10 plus years of work. And I know we've all benefited. I've got little scribbles of notes here on all the great things to note. So thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, everybody.
And we'll pass it over to Wes, who's going to introduce Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wes. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology at U of T, and I'm also the lab coordinator for the Ethnography Lab. My pronouns are probably somewhere in the ballpark of he, him. I am wearing a goldenrod sweater with, I have long curly hair and a beard. There's I think a fig plant behind me with big broad leaves and a line drawing on the wall and a black shell, small black shell. So Elizabeth Chin is an anthropologist with a varied practice that includes experimental writing, performative scholarship, and engaged community work. She is author of Purchasing Power, Black Kids and American Consumer Culture, and My Life with Things, The Consumer Diaries. Currently, she is editor-in-chief of American Anthropologist and working hard to create editorial practices that are supportive, developmental, and do not replicate the toxicity of academic life. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Elizabeth Chin.
So I will say thank you so much for the invitation, and it's a particular joy to be sharing space with Kate, whose work is so inspirational and exciting to see. And I am speaking to you from this place we call Los Angeles, which is on the unceded ancestral lands of the Tongva and Gabrielino people. And just would also note that Los Angeles has the largest population of Native people of any city in the United States, in part because of relocation programs that brought people of many indigenous nations to this place. And it's something that's deserves so much more attention. I'm half Chinese and half white, which means that I appear to be racially ambiguous. And so I look like I could be from anywhere, which I experience whenever I go anywhere. People say, "Oh, you look like this," but I'm a lady of a certain age, and I have big blue glasses on and a big purple bun of hair, and I appear to be in a women's bathroom that has pink doors and blue tiles, and that image comes from Squid Game. So I'm going to talk about the Laboratory of Speculative Ethnology, which you know, is a real fake entity. Unlike Kate, there is no space that it occupies in a formal way, except for a few boxes of stuff in my garage. And so there's something about the realness and the fakeness of it that's sort of important to how it came about and how it continues to operate. And I think one of the things, and this will come up, I think, is that I've been having to think a lot about what's the difference between me and the lab, other projects I do and the lab, and to what degrees do those come together or not. Like Kate, I'm an anthropologist who does not work in an anthropology department or an anthropology school. And in 2011, I joined Art Center College of Design in the Media Design Practices MFA program. And that, you know, is in large reason how the lab came into being. It's been, you know, utterly transformational and very exciting to be in a design school, but it's also been terrifying and really frustrating. The department that I work in is very experimental and speculative, lots of new media, lots of playing around with different kinds of technologies, ranging from, you know, basic Arduino or Raspberry Pi stuff to, you know, Unity and augmented reality and virtual reality. As a person of color, I found myself in a white institution, in a white physical space with white colleagues, and where the ideology was white. And so literally the beginning of the lab was me just going, oh my God, we need to get some color in here. You know, and in the program that I was originally brought in to build, we were traveling with our students to do field work. So design students doing field work. And the first 4 years we were in Uganda. And so I was coming back from Uganda with these duffel bags full of Dutch wax fabrics. I've always sewed, I love fabrics, etc. So my first instinct was like, okay, I'm gonna found a lab, and now I need to make a lab suit. And so I have all this Dutch wax fabric, so I'm gonna make a lab suit out of this Dutch wax fabric. So that's literally the beginning. And that allowed, I think, having that sort of figure or that idea allowed this range of experiments that have flowed out of it. These things are just actually something from a student exercise in an undergrad class that are sort of an example of some of the early thinking that I was doing. And this was a class, my class on race and racism, where I asked them to design a racism detector. And then we printed them out on temporary tattoo paper, and they could use them and think about how they worked and what they would do in this sort of way that's typical of a design speculative exercise. So a lot of the one strain of the work, I would say, is to ask critical questions about technology and its aesthetics and its purpose. And so one thing that is extraordinarily important to me are Swarovski crystals. I love them and they go on everything. But part of that is really a question about the aesthetics of technology, and in particular, using making as a way to ask the question about, in a kind of Afrofuturist mode, why can't technology look, quote, more African? And I don't mean that in a simplistic way, but trying to challenge, again, that kind of sleek Silicon Valley kind of thing. And then the question moves further into what the technologies do and how they do it. And a lot of that is connected to methods, ethnographic methods, and the ways that traditionally or not, as ethnographers, we've collected information and, you know, colonialist modalities, et cetera, et cetera. So one early set of explorations I did, I call them the Afro GoPros. And this was making housings for GoPros that, again, sort of draw from an Afrofuturistic kind of aesthetic, and also place them differently on the body. So the very first one I made, which I didn't include a picture of here, is actually designed to be part of a head wrap. And the GoPro is positioned up on the side of the head with the idea that it's a woman wearing it, it's an African woman wearing it, and she's going to a party, right? And she's documenting that. This one is worn around the neck. And part of what this really began, which is very much unfinished, is this question of displacing the eye and from gathering images as part of fieldwork. And also, there's a strong strain in a lot of using technology, particularly in ethnography, I think less in archaeology, as a mediator between the ethnographer and those people being researched. And there's just, you know, all these pictures where the technology is physically between. And what happens when you sort of displace that and move it somewhere else? And what are the possibilities that come up, both in terms of documentation and methodology? So, this is some of the experiments. You see the suits here, a set of suits. And I had a couple summers where we have the opportunity in my department to run summer projects and have students participate. And so the first thing I always do with them is have them make their own suit. And for most of them, it's the first time they've sewed, and that's a lot of fun. You know, like I remember actually the person who made, no, it wasn't the person who made this suit, it was a different suit, who was like, you know, this person had a whole career at Microsoft before she came and got her master's with us. And she took the fabric, she was like, oh my God, it's two-dimensional now, right? Like, so sewing just seems so magical to her. But the suits also become a sort of way to assume a persona or put yourself in a different place. And the headgear similarly is this way to sort of become someone else, or reposition, replace yourself. And again, the aesthetics are all very purposefully drawn from or referring to the fringe here in this case sort of refers to candomblé and Afro diasporic religious practice. So this was an early collaboration with a local dance company and Chaos Network, who are here today and who will talk more, where Vive Brazil was doing a program they call Samba in the Streets and teaching dance classes, and they were generous enough to wear the suits one day, and the dancers are also wearing cameras. I do a lot of experimenting, again, with repurposing spy cameras and messing around and seeing what can happen with that. And again, here they are. Here's another, you know, the speculative objects are a sort of an ongoing piece of what I do. And so this is an early one again, which I call the sort of Flavor Flav hip hop oppositional gaze necklace, which has a spy camera in it that runs off a battery. And so it'll grab a little piece of video or photo, depending on how you set it, when it's triggered by motion or sound. And then those things later can be sort of stitched together into a kind of field note or even a kind of productive output. And then here's another one of the GoPros. And we'll just treat ourselves to a little bit of there. I don't know, I don't think I turned on the sound. Anyway, they're dancing and playing. So one of the things that's really important for me, with the work is getting out there and getting out into the world and with people. And this is just a series of photos from a GoPro that one of the dancers was wearing. That's just an example of the kind of images they produce that I just find really beautiful, number one, but also really fascinating. And then my very favorite photo is this one, this is Linda Udine, who's the founder of Vive Brazil, looking into the headgear there. Another sort of thread has been Wakanda University, which it seems to be a common theme as I get mad and then I do something. So, you know, Wakanda University is something that really has emerged out of discomfort that I and many others experience at the annual anthropology meetings, particularly as people of color. And so what year was it when Donna Aying Davis was the program chair? She introduced a category called installation, and I got very excited. And that began sort of a series of lab installations that then morphed into Wakanda University installations. And one of the things that the installations have had to struggle with is a kind of communication and expectation disjuncture between what an installation is or could be and I'll just say like conference logistics or conference normativities. So this is a picture of sort of a full installation of the lab in our studio at school, at Art Center. But for one of the first installations of the lab, I had taken, you know, all of this stuff, shipped it, dragged it across the country, and was faced with a conference room with all the chairs in rows. And so I ended up just setting up in the hall outside the conference room and like taping things up onto the wall and setting them up in the hallway because it was the only way to get people to interact with the suits and these other things that I had out there. I've continued a fair amount in that guerrilla vein because I haven't had a lot of it. It's kind of the only way to do things in that interactive way that's important to me. And so the first iteration of Wakanda University was basically installing this in a space that I'd rented in the exhibition hall at the annual meetings, because then I knew I had a space that would be mine to program and to use for the duration of the meeting, which I didn't necessarily want or need the duration of the meeting, but I needed control of my space. And so we put out a call and we said, okay, we're going to do this thing called Wakanda University. And we asked people to propose different kinds of programming. And we had a few different things. Danya Glabau collaborated and brought a bunch of she curated a selection of virtual reality pieces from around the world that were really great. And we had other people who ran some workshops in this space. And one of the things that was really interesting was that people recognized the space for what it was, which was this sort of Afro-futurist, indigenous futurist space that was in part a space of safety, and started just gathering there and talking and spending time. Here's someone who put a suit on and was just dancing around, which was lovely. And again, another person who stopped by and actually spent some time sort of working in the booth and sort of activating things. This is just a quick, I love doing stuff quick, dirty, and cheap. So this is just a kind of time lapse, taken on a phone, just as a simple documentation of what was happening in the space. And there's Danya wearing a lab coat and also wearing a camera. And again, just sort of seeing, and I have like a jillion of these that I haven't even gone through yet, even though it's been how many years since this happened. So, it's serious, but it's not too serious, right? You try to have sort of a fair amount of humor and a lot of play as part of that. Sort of alongside of this, I've been doing a collaboration with my colleague, Casey Anderson, who's here, and going to Haiti, and really on the basis of a series of workshops that Casey has designed, trying to start a small electronics lab and curriculum in a small rural village in Haiti. And I'm not going to talk about that too much, but it becomes important very much to what we're doing now. It's very much in this kind of, in some ways, quick and dirty orientation. And in particular, right, we're not helping anybody. And we're really focused on engaging local orientations to technology. So we're not interested in showing up with a bunch of fancy stuff that when it breaks, it can't get fixed. We're the opposite of that, right? Locally available materials to do things that are interesting and cool, useful potentially, but it's an arts-based approach, so it's not technical. Like I couldn't tell you an ohm from a volt or anything, but I can solder really well, right? Casey can, he knows all the electronic stuff. Just as another sort of side thing, one of the things that's become very important to the work that Casey and I do, but also the lab in general, is developing strategies for documentation that are one, anonymous, two, good looking, and three, we are not the subjects, right? And those are all kind of political choices. So most of our documentation, we try to avoid representing ourselves and to center the people who are doing the work, and to make sure that those images, if they are images, show them in ways that are not just respectful, but recognizing their autonomy and agency, I'll say. Because a lot of the work is with kids in the US in particular, we're also really having to be thoughtful about doing documentation, again, that maintains anonymity, particularly of children. So again, soldering begins with making things out of paper clips, because that's like really easy to do and it's fun. So here's somebody has made their name. And again, these are all workshops that Casey has developed. And then, you know, our dreams come true when the kids just get off and running on their own, which is what we hope for. So at this point, I think this was like the second or third day, they were making these sculptures with paper clips on little tin cans that are garbage in the area. And they basically, you know, spent 3 days making a ton of these sculptures, and they were really fantastic. But just letting them take the ball and run with it is sort of, you know, when we've reached our dream state. You know, it's when we're really happy. There goes Casey in the background. It's been really tough because the last couple of years we haven't been able to go, and with the state that Haiti is now, we're not sure when we're going to be able to get back, and that's really tough. It's proven, you know, we had aspirations to try to support the lab from distance, and that's just proven just really something that we haven't been able to pull off, which is a big disappointment. What we are doing, which has been really exciting, is back at Chaos Network, which is run by Ben Caldwell, who I think is also here, and we'll ask him to step up and give a chat shortly. In Leimert Park, a really vibrant and important part of Los Angeles, historically Black. Ben is a really important force there. And we've been chatting since those first experiments. And so what we've been doing now, I think we started in July. We go every Saturday, we set up outside Chaos Network on this corner that's in front of the space that Ben has. And basically what it's evolved into is we have our stuff there. We have what we call sort of buffet style workshops available in our heads and with the equipment we've got. And people walk by and we say, hey, want to make a robot? And then, you know, the kids say, yeah. And we show them how to make a quick little toothbrush robot using toothbrushes and batteries. And then hopefully we've hooked them in, and we can, they'll might want to do another project and another project and another project. So we've taught kids as young as 7 how to solder and how to do these kinds of things. And our you know, taking it in some ways low and slow, which is like we just show up. Our main method is we show up. And Ben has a vision that is really extraordinary, that expands well into the future of this community and what this work could turn into. Just recently, one of the so that work is not exactly lab work, but you know, this is where I'm having to ask myself these questions about what's the difference between the lab and these collaborations. Where does one begin? Where does the other end? And I'm certainly going to be interested to hear from Ben and Casey about their personal thoughts on that. But this was Halloween, so October 31st. This piece was directly a lab installation that Ziggy Zager here, who was a activist and Afrofuturist, had asked for. That in particular, again, sort of like the lab kind of aesthetic and ethic is like a little bit cheap and dirty, a little bit spectacular, and sort of very portable. So set up the space, create the space. She was having a political discussion, which then local politicians were there. And so they were in that space having that discussion. And then testing out some new-ish speculative objects that I've been trying to play with. Sort of here in the background, you can see one of them. So let me see if that, oh yeah, there's Ziggy Zager. So Chaos Network is back here. Here's Ziggy Zager doing lightsaber with this local kid who was like very excited. So here's Ben, and I'll let Ben introduce himself more, but again, a really important force in the neighborhood and in so many ways. The speculative object here is, I need a name for it. I haven't done it yet, but it's essentially, if you imagine a lampshade that has a speaker in the top, that's what it is. And I totally skipped over the part where Wakanda University had the amazing opportunity to be installed at Simon Fraser due to Kate's, amazing generosity. And I can talk more about that experience. But I actually wanted to, in some ways, spend more time with Ben and Casey. The first iteration of this was at Simon Fraser, of this lampshade thing. And so in that first one, it was the sound coming out of it was an ASMR reading of Marx's Capital. And so for those of you who don't know what ASMR is, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's this way of making sound that for many people, when they hear it, it gives them a lot of pleasure. So like sounds of like certain kinds of scratching or paper being rumpled, certain kinds of taps, a sort of often a low kind of breathy voice. And so that idea has begun to morph a bit into what if these devices are bathing, it's a kind of sound bath experience that immerses the person in radical Black text. And so I like to describe this picture of this is the look of a man who's being bathed in radical Black feminism. So the text that's coming out is the text of the Combahee River Collective. There's work to be done because it's being read by a male AI voice, and that's like very bizarre. And I'm having a big struggle with AI voices because none of them sound Black, and that's its own rabbit hole that I'm trying to figure out and asking myself a lot of questions about what the voice should sound like. Should it be a human voice? Should it be AI? And if it's AI, how do I get it to sound different? Anyway, so there's that. Another speculative object, and then this will really transition into, again, sort of where the work might go with Ben, is this is what I call the hands up, don't shoot glove. Again, asking that question. The question early on, the way I put it to myself with this particular object was, what if the technology is designed to protect the Black man and not to surveil him? And so here you see the back of the glove. The front of the glove has a small camera that is connected to a Raspberry Pi and an accelerometer that's been trained so that when the person wearing the glove makes that hands up, don't shoot gesture, the device starts taking pictures and sending them to the cloud, with the idea being that, that might possibly protect them. But I also wanted it to be, again, to question those aesthetics and those uses in other ways, so that the beading here is all referencing, again, Santeria and Vodou. There's a double-headed axe in the center made with red and white beads. This is referencing Shango, who is justice, the dispenser of justice. And there are 16 cowries on the entire glove, and those 16 cowries represent a divination tool that's used in Santeria. And then the sequins and those, again, reference Vodou, and the red there is for Ogu, who is the blacksmith and a kind of protective warrior. And he's also the owner of iron, which would be guns. And so, again, it's a spiritual protection as well as a kind of technological protection, as well as making that discussion about the ways in which Afrodiasporic religions are important technologies of survival in the face of white supremacy. This is an earlier, sort of the first iteration of the glove, which I also deployed at Chaos Network. And what I love here is this guy, when he was trying on the glove, this original glove is sort of a stretchy, like Lycra, and his hand was too big. And so like when he was putting it on, he goes like, if the glove don't fit, right? So, also referencing an important moment of a Black man wearing a glove. So, I just loved the way there was this larger discussion just in this very quick moment that emerged. But the discussion that continued to emerge really came from Ben, who challenged me and said, why are you focusing on this moment of threat and death and whatever? Like, what if you think about something else? And for me now, that something else is emerging into technologies of Black abundance, right? What might those look like? And really hoping to have some of the work be about workshops, experiences, whatever, asking people to participate and imagine those things and create them for themselves. And so this is a picture of Amir, who's a young person who's been really becoming an important partner for us on our Saturdays. And this was what he made, which was this Black love future detection device. And so this is, for now, where certainly the work is headed. Again, right now, what we do is we show up. And so we don't know where it's going, but we know it's going to be somewhere pretty awesome. And I just wonder, Casey and Ben, I would love for you to add some thoughts or ideas, because I just did all the talking.
Casey should kick it off. Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Casey Anderson. Irish Italian white guy in Los Angeles right now. I'm happy to be here speaking with y'all. One of the things I wanted to hit on real quick that I think is really exciting about this style of work that Elizabeth and I have been doing with Ben, and also in Limerick Park in Los Angeles, and also in Haiti, is just showing up and providing a pathway for people to step into working with technology. Really generates its own momentum. In the video that Elizabeth showed of the youth in Haiti building sculptures. As the camera tracks across that table, there are two youth there that are repairing a cell phone, which, to me seems like a pretty good indication of how creating an environment where people have access and time to experiment with technology, they'll automatically connect it to things that they know they need in their own life, right? So even though the activity that we had them working on was perhaps a little bit less practical, it was more about building sculptures and becoming more familiar with the technique of soldering, as well as repurposing some things we had brought over. Participants will immediately, just in that atmosphere, find ways to make that relevant to their day-to-day lives without us having to say, this is a class about fixing your cell phone, for example. And it's wonderful because a lot of the times when I tell people about this work we're doing, I get pushback from people who are saying like, oh, well, why are you doing all these kind of unusual art activities? Why not make it hyper practical? And it just goes back to what Elizabeth was saying, like, the kind of deficit narrative that a lot of these kinds of this kind of work in underserved communities often arises from is unnecessary. I mean, outsiders don't need to go into a community to say like, here are the things you don't have, and we're gonna show you how to make them. Like, the community members, of course, already know about that, right? So instead, what we focus on is genuinely creating a welcoming environment in a place where we're outsiders, and it becomes more collaborative. These kind of fun, unusual activities that make technology seem approachable, we know are fertile jumping off points for participants. And then, through the act of participating in these kinds of activities, as participants get more comfortable both with the technology material as well as with us, we can kind of let them step into being collaborators and co-direct and ultimately take over, the orientation of what we're working on. And I think that's, one thing that's been really exciting in Limerick Park too. We have people who are showing up regularly enough where they're now able to become, workshop leaders. We have a youth who's been coming regularly, and lately, if a new child walks in and is drawn in by the offer to make a robot, we let him lead that new community member, and we're just there kind of in the background, ready to support if necessary. I wonder if Ben has anything to add along those lines, or maybe that hasn't been covered yet.
Yeah, I would just say, my name is Ben Caldwell. I'm from New Mexico, which is the land of the Apache. And I moved here where it's the land of the Gabriel Indians. I am also African, American. I was dragged here about 500 years ago and put on this island called America and forced to work for this whole time. But right now we're developing this project with Elizabeth and Casey and Ann. It has been really, like she said, it's simple and down and dirt because we're doing groundwork. We're not doing flyover work. We're in the ground doing world building with this community here. So basically, the process is to first teach the people how to fish. And if the people learn to fish, and that fishing is the basic element of putting an idea together and making it run, they can do this in 25 minutes or less here, and then run away with knowledge that most people never do. of being able to get an idea, put it together, and finish. So that's part of what the process is for me. Even though it doesn't seem like it's finished, it's a finished idea because they left with an object that moves, that does something, and they can go home and tell people that they did something in a technological way in their own community. This, for us, leads to a project that we've been funded for the next 5 years to do, is the AR, VR, and all of the integrations of all those things meeting in the first and last mile shuttles that we're putting together for the community. So we're not just playing around with just toothbrushes, but we're really also making it go all the way up to the electric engine. And then within that to work with another portion of Art Center, which is their car design, which Retro is a PhD student that graduated from there, and also MIT that's leading the charge on interconnecting these things. So basically what we're trying to do here at Chaos Network, it's an incubator. The facility and the place that they were talking about that in front of the place was something that we wrote $1.5 million grant with the city, so we could have a petri dish to work out all of the various elements of this community to see how we could best work with all the people around it, which is the university, which I work with. I work with all of the various universities and colleges and schools that works within the area, so they can have a real active place to work out their ideas in a community-based laboratory. So that's the basic elements of what Chaos Network is about. And what we liked about working with Casey and then they were here really helping us set up these basic templates of working out how African culture can, it's already well amalgamated into a United States. I almost think that America is African culture when you really look at it. It's just been a co-opted concept that erased our name as being the basic elements of it. But I think the American culture has really, really grown from it, grown from our intervention of living here and how we've made it possible for us to secretly have a Wakanda here, which Elizabeth alluded to, and I think it's more than what you really think when you talk about the Wakanda bubble. It's a real integral part of what we're going to build toward, because it's a thing that has kept us very much alive here in the United States, and we're doing pretty well by it with these guys helping. Is that enough, Casey? All right. Elizabeth?
So maybe we've got about 10 minutes or so left here. Thank you, Elizabeth, Casey, and Ben, very much for that. So maybe if anyone's got any questions here, type them in the chat, raise your hand, and maybe we'll just kind of collect all of them, as many as they are, and then whatever seems appropriate to respond to would be great. So anyone here got a question for this? Or maybe you're just kind of like dwelling in the inspiration. I mean, I kind of feel like that's what I'm kind of doing here. You're just dwelling in the inspiration. It's remarkable. So maybe I'll pose one. Okay, actually, Kate, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Ben and Casey. I just was thinking a lot about something you raised, Elizabeth, about not having a space and what that means as a lab. And actually, just hearing you talk, it's very powerful to not make the space the most important part of this, because I actually don't think ultimately the space is that important. It's great to have a place to put things. It's a great to have a place to sit and have a coffee and eat lunch together and to meet. But, you know, in universities, I think should provide those spaces for people to gather. And it's a problem that people don't feel they can come together, you know, in a way where they have space to create. But I think you're showing how important actually it is that the work happens outside of the university, and that actually helps us think about a lab or whatever that means in a different way. So I think doing it and making it happen is actually the most important thing, and it shouldn't rely on institutional support that probably will never come, or that might come, but you have to make it come because of the work that's happening.
Yeah, and that's certainly you know, as we all exist in these various kinds of neoliberal institutions, that's one reason why I've been actually very purposeful about not, you know, it's my lab, right? It's our lab. It's not part of the college because I don't want them to be able to claim or to try to say I could do this or I can't do that.
So Elizabeth, I would love to hear, I mean, one of the things I could have asked the same question of Kate and maybe even Casey or Ben. And one of the things that I think when we are often trained in graduate programs, we are trained to become experts on this thing. And all these other things that might be interesting possibilities, we foreclose because we're not experts in those things. And what collaboration makes possible is you can say, I don't know how to do this thing, but that person does, or this other person might. And what would happen if I came into contact with that? And it really strikes me that your experience, I don't think you probably knew how to originally do some of the things that you ended up then coming to do, but it really was about connecting with others in ways that make that possible. And I wonder if that's something that's really kind of lacking in institutional forms of graduate training, is this kind of enforced foreclosure of collaboration, at least within the traditional departments. Clearly with Kate's, that's not the case. But I wonder if that's kind of something that you see both, you know, as an anthropologist, but in a design college, but also there you are at the masthead of the American Anthropologist journal. Anyway, I wonder if there's any reflection there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think one of the things is realizing the degree to which those limits are self-imposed. And certainly being at Art Center has given me lots of access to bust out of some of those limits. And, you know, Casey and I work together in the same department, as well as having this collaboration. But, you know, with the journal, it's been quite funny because when I first took over, I remember going like, who do I ask about that? And then I was like, oh, wait, me, you know, like, oh, I can do that the way I think is the right way. Right. But some of it involves, you know, a combination of sort of not caring about certain kinds of academic traditions or habits. And some of it involves a very purposeful taking on of those things, which I think ethnographic terminalia and Kate in her work are all about both of those things. And there's something for me, you know, I gave up tenure to take the job I have now, and it was like totally liberating. It's like, well, can't do anything to me now, you know. And yeah, I'm not being very coherent, but there's I've gotten much more solid in like, you don't have to do things just because you think you have to do them, right? You can actually maybe not do them or do them differently, or, you know. And I learned a ton from Ben, who is just a master of kind of bringing people together and kind of creating these moments. You know, it's pretty extraordinary.
Well, it's exactly the end of our 2 hours here. And no other questions came into the chat and no other hands were raised. And so I will just take the moment to just with profound gratitude, thank Elizabeth and Casey and Ben for coming. I thank Kate and the graduate students that she had present to come. And it was totally coincidental that, well, no, anyway, it was an inspired coincidence that we were able to bring both of you together to do this, because I think the experiences of both centers, labs are so fascinatingly kind of complementary. You know, space, no space, technologies of various kinds. And anyway, it's fantastic. And I think, you know, my hope is that, you know, with these sessions that we have, Meet the Labs, is that kind of, you know, each one adds something to the rich sense of possibility that the forms really bring. And so good to have some such wonderful examples. So anyway, thank you both so much for being with us. We've learned a lot.